Right, I'd like now to welcome to the programme Ken Kilbride, CEO of ADHD Ireland. So thanks very much for coming on the programme, Ken.
Oh, thanks very much. It's my pleasure to be here with you all.
Yes, I suppose most people have heard of ADHD, but they may not know an awful lot about it. It kind of starts in childhood, doesn't it?
Well, it doesn't start in childhood. People are born with the condition. So
right,
yes, it does start in childhood, but that's only because that's when they were born.
Yes.
And it affects people across their entire lifespan. So ADHD is a condition that's primarily genetic, which is the bit about being born with it. So, and then again, some people, what they will say is that about 5% of children, which is 1 in 20, which is, there's always one child with ADHD in every classroom across the country. And then what they say is it's about 3% of adults. So what they're saying is there that about, maybe 40% of people learn to manage their ADHD, that they no longer meet what's called the clinical criteria. So they still have ADHD.
Yeah.
It's just that they're learning to manage it in a particular way. They no longer meet the clinical criteria. So as I say, you're born with ADHD and it affects you across your entire lifespan.
Right. So up to recent times, would it have been regarded as kind of disruptive behaviour, quote unquote, in the classroom? Yeah. And so on.
The naughty child syndrome or, bad parenting, bit of discipline would sort that out. So
yes.
Certainly that was the perception.
Yeah. And has that changed? In most cases, that is, or does it can it still happen that people misunderstand?
Well, it's the most cases bit I would go with in terms of what you were saying there, and that certainly the perception is changing.
Yeah.
And certainly we now know that because it does affect you across the lifespan, and there is figures out there, and it's internationally reputable science at this stage. That people with ADHD are going to have challenges around anxiety and depression across their lifetime. If it's untreated and unmanaged, there's going to be challenges around employment, marital relations, things like that as well.
Right.
So it is one of those conditions when it's unmanaged and untreated, which for most people it is going to cause challenges across the lifespan.
Right. And is there a particular set of behaviours that apply across the board, or can it vary for different children?
What happens is you probably heard the saying, when you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. Because the ADHD being genetic, and the genetic makeup for everybody is different. So how it presents in one person is not necessarily how it presents in another person.
Right.
So you need to bear that in mind. Now, what we've done now is we've moved away from looking at behaviours as a way of describing ADHD to now more looking at the neural pathways.
Right.
So we say is that people with ADHD have different brain wiring or neurology than people that don't have ADHD. So it's not better, it's not worse, it's just different.
Right.
So the brain of someone with ADHD is different than someone who doesn't have a brain with ADHD.
Right.
But in terms of the behaviours, now they are a useful way of or a shorthand way of describing the condition. So ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. So within that, there's 3 main behaviours. We're talking about, the attention deficit, the hyperactivity, and the impulsivity. So the attention deficit, now that's actually incorrectly named as well, because it's not an attention deficit, because people with ADHD have the same level of focus as anyone else. It's just the inability to retain attention is the key driver behind ADHD. So when someone with ADHD walks into a room, they're not just focusing on one thing, they're focusing on everything in the room.
Right.
And they're trying to say, look, I'm looking at everything. So again, that's the challenge. We say with ADHD is what's called a motivation or reward-based brain. So the brain is saying, I'm not finding what I'm looking at interesting at the minute. Go and find me something else that is. So it's always looking for something else more interesting. So that's what we say. It's not attention deficit. It's just the inability to retain attention, because the brain is always looking for something more exciting.
Right.
So that's the attention deficit.
So in the classroom, obviously, then a child, the teacher might think this child is not focusing on what I'm trying to teach them, and they're thinking about other things or looking out the window or whatever it might be. Yeah.
Well, they are trying, because they know their attention's gone off focus themselves. And they're going, oh, the teacher's talking, so I better bring my mind back. So what I say, it's like, I live here in Beaumont, you're out in the Blanchardstown area. So in between us is Dublin Airport. And the analogy I always use when I'm talking to groups or people like that is, imagine Dublin Airport and there's 500, 600 flights coming in every day. And there's the air traffic controllers, they're the regulator, they're processing all the thoughts and, making sure it all goes at the same time. But with ADHD, you don't have those air traffic controllers. So all the thoughts are coming and going at the same time. So, imagine what Dublin Airport would be like if we still had that 600 flights coming in and going out every day, but the air traffic controllers didn't come in.
Right.
So that's what it's like having ADHD. So they know that there's things going around. And I often say, when you talk to someone with ADHD, give them a second to get their minds in thought, because, all those planes are still flying around. They need to give them, 20 seconds to get those thoughts in line and to focus on what you're saying. So teachers, when we talk to them, so for instance, we did training for 100 teachers this Tuesday. We did training for 100 teachers last Tuesday. So, and we're getting that information out there that, how do you work and engage with someone with ADHD in the classroom to keep them focused on what you're talking about? And that's always the key driver. They are trying to pay attention, but the mind wanders off.
Yeah.
If a cat walks across the playground, that's far more interesting than anything the teacher could ever say. And so how do you keep their attention is always the key driver when you're working with people with ADHD.
Right. And it affects boys more than girls, doesn't it? Yeah.
No.
Oh, no, is that another myth? Yeah.
That's another myth.
Oh, I see, yeah.
We mentioned there at the start that it's genetic.
Right.
So it's 50% boys, 50% girls.
Right.
And what you find, and what you're right in terms of the figures are, so the prime age for getting a diagnosis for children is the ages of 8 to 12. But in that age range, you're finding boys get diagnosed approximately 5 times more often than girls do.
Right.
So why is that? There's an old saying, girls internalize, boys externalize. So the boys externalize their ADHD and they're moving around, bouncing off the walls. The teacher can see that. The girls will internalize their ADHD with their attention deficit. They're sitting down the back of the class, they're being quiet, they're being shy, they're being dreamy, not causing a problem.
Right.
They're not getting picked up.
I see, yeah.
So it's just that's how it is. But say it is 50% boys, 50% girls. But because of the way it presents at that age, and girls tend to be better at social camouflaging and social masking than boys. So the boys get picked up earlier than girls.
Right, so that must cause a particular problem. So with girls, that it's not being recognised. Yeah. So
what you find is that all that social camouflaging and all that masking, and trying to fit in all the time, causes anxiety. So what you find is that girls, particularly as they go into secondary school and into puberty at around the same time, that can increase. So we would always say that, if there's any, girl 13, 14, 15 presenting for anxiety and depression at, the GP, certainly look for ADHD as well.
So can it be misinterpreted then if girls are, anxious and depressed? Can it be something else? People think it's something else that's causing these problems, yeah.
Well, again, I've often said, we get primarily funded through the HSE. As an alternative source of funding, I've always said, if we got €20 or, for every woman that came to us and said, hi, I'm in my early 40s, I've been anxiety medication or depression medication for the last 20 years. I've just found out I've adult ADHD. Right. We wouldn't need funding from the HSE.
Right.
It's endemic out there at the minute that, underdiagnosed, undertreated women in particular for adult ADHD.
And could say things like eating disorders, could it possibly be an explanation for that? Yeah. There's new research out there that's showing that there is a connection between the two. Absolutely, yes. Right, yeah. So as regards treatment, does medication come into it, or?
Yeah. So ADHD is what we call a neurodevelopmental condition. So there's other conditions in that spectrum, like autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia, ADHD. But what makes ADHD a little bit different in that spectrum is that there is actually medication that works. So again, now it works maybe for 2/3 of people, and it works about 80% of the time. But certainly when it does work, we've had parents, we've had adults come to us saying, it's life-changing. It's like turning the lights on for the first time. It's like putting glasses on. So certainly when it does work, it can have a hugely impactful, beneficial for people's lives. But what you do also need to say at the same time is that to get the best outcomes for someone with ADHD, it's delivered by what's called a multimodal approach. So that means it's a combination of medication and other therapies such as, behavioural management, speech and language therapy, OT. Because there is another saying, pills don't build skills. So you can't medication will never resolve ADHD by itself. It can certainly help, but it will never resolve it. So you need that combination together of the medication with the behavioural management, the speech and language therapy or the OT to get the best results.
Right, so the various programs are used to help people cope with the condition, yeah?
Yeah. So, for instance, we run a parenting course. So again, parents will come along and they learn how to work with the child, to help them with their ADHD. We run courses for adults to help them self-manage their ADHD as well. So there is we still don't have enough of them, to be honest. But there's more there now than there was 5 years ago when there wasn't any at all. So things are improving.
Right. So are certain employment opportunities not available then for certain jobs, or can
most jobs are available now. There is some places that as part of a broad spectrum of other conditions as well. For instance, pilots. If you're on ADHD medication, I know in the UK, you can't become a pilot in the UK if you have ADHD or another medication. There's challenges being in places like the armed forces around the world. And what they'll say is there's a challenge with ADHD itself. It's that if you're in the middle of a war zone, we can't guarantee you to get your medication. And so again, there's careers like that. But what we would say, just in terms of ADHD, obviously there is some areas that tend to work better than others. But in terms of what's the best career for someone with ADHD, it's a career in an area that you're particularly interested in, whatever that may be.
Right.
So, you might get accountants with ADHD, or you might get film directors with ADHD. Now, they tend to veer more towards careers that involve movement, because movement helps with ADHD. Physical activity, like car mechanics, things like that as well. And you find an awful lot of people in the creative industries, musicians, actors, writers, things like that as well, will tend to have ADHD.
Yeah, I've seen interviews with actors and creative, artistic people, and they often say, or quite often, that they have have ADHD. Is there ongoing research into it, or?
Oh, it's probably the most researched condition on earth in the psychiatric playbook. So there's always new research coming out. And again, ADHD Ireland does take its part in that here in Ireland. So, for instance, next week in DCU, we're doing an event, how women ADHD, because how women present and how it interacts with them is different than how it interacts with men. And so again, we've done some research with UCD and the HSE on how it impacts for women. Now again, people are welcome to come along. You get information on ADHD Ireland, but basically what we're showing in that research is that for women, if you look at all major indexes for mental health in women, they score higher when they have ADHD.
Right.
And that's basically blunt, particularly around menstruation and menopause, ADHD and estrogen, and it doesn't go well together.
So mental health generally, that's a big factor in dealing with the condition. Yeah.
Oh yeah. We'd always say that the biggest challenge with ADHD is not the ADHD itself, but it's the stigma and the low self-esteem that the condition brings. Because when you talk about here in Ireland that there's probably 170, about 230,000 people, but 170,000 adults, of probably 150,000 are undiagnosed and untreated. So they know there's something going on. They know they're in the workplace, things are happening different to them compared to their work colleagues. They know they're having challenges at home in terms of relationships. They don't know what it is, but they know there's something out there. So that causes low self-esteem. That can cause stigma. That causes mental health problems. And as I mentioned earlier, we know that people with ADHD can over-index for what's called substance misuse, particularly around alcohol and cannabis, because there's something going on. They're self-medicating.
Right.
So again, we're always saying, get that information out there. Once you get it assessed and get it treated, life outcomes generally improve.
Right. So the organisation ADHD Ireland, how long has it been in existence?
Well, the organisation itself is in existence since about 1980. But it was only sort of 2015, 2016 that the condition was sort of recognised, and we started getting funding from the HSE. So again, when I started in 2017, there was 1.5 people. So we're now up to 8, 9 people. So again, there is that greater recognition of the condition, both within the health sector and the mental health sector and the HSE, but in the public in general. And and we are seeing particularly lots of celebrities coming out in the creative sectors, saying they have ADHD. So, but again, there is still that public perception out there, among certain cohorts that, it is that, just the naughty children, a little bit of behaviour could help, rather than seen as that it is a real condition. that is being in the human genome since there has been humans. And so again, we're just trying to get that information out there that, you need to, incorporate ADHD into the education system, into the work and the welfare systems as well.
Right, and you'd have various programs and events on a continuous basis to.
Oh yeah. So we run about 450 events every year.
Oh, right.
So again, that's 8 to 10 every week. So again, this week, we have an adult support group on last night. We have a couple coming up, one in Galway, one in Ennis this week. We have our focus group. We do every Friday. We do an online mindfulness class for parents. We did our 2 teacher trainings. We have our UMAP course, our parenting courses. So there's tons happening every week to help and support people with ADHD.
Right, and people can volunteer. Do you have volunteers involved? Yeah,
indeed we do. We couldn't run our 450 events unless we had our volunteers, to be honest. So again, if you go on ADHDIreland.ie, you'll see a section for volunteers, and we'll take you through the process.
Right, and funding, you get funding from the HAC, but do you
not enough?
Yeah, fundraising would be an issue then as well. Yeah, obviously. Yeah.
Well, it is. Yeah. Again, with the perception out there with ADHD is, we don't ever see ourselves standing on the side of a street, collecting for ADHD Ireland. We don't ever see ourselves, going to the local supermarket and doing, packing bags. So again, we look at other avenues of funding for ADHD, and particularly through the HSE has been invaluable for ourselves.
Right, and support for families would be a huge thing, wouldn't it?
Yes, yeah.
That you would provide, yeah.
We do a lot of that as well.
Yeah. And you have a website and with a lot of information on it, yeah.
Yep. You go to ADHDIreland.ie, you'll find it all.
Yeah. So before we wind up, have you anything else you'd like to add, Ken?
No, just to say that, the big thing about ADHD is that once you get it assessed and managed, it's actually a very treatable condition. So we would say to everybody, just if you're thinking it's ADHD, you need to go to your GP to get a referral. Certainly to do that. Don't take no for an answer. Just to bear in mind, I say it can improve, but there is no challenges out there getting assessment and treatment here in Ireland that there's long wait lists.
Right, because there are clinicians who specialise in it, isn't there? Yeah.
There is, yeah. Both for children, there's what's called the CAM service. So again, the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Service. So for a child to get referred there, you need to get a referral from your GP. And again, in terms of where we are in Dublin, again there is adult services. Now there isn't a special adult clinic in the Blanchardstown area. So what you need to do for that is you get referred again from your GP into your community mental health services, and they see what they can do for you from there.
Right. Okay. Thanks very much, Ken, for doing the interview. Yeah.
Okay. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thanks.